Hello there guys, Nick here. A little bit sick, but I hope it doesn't get in the way. Today I want to show you a cool project that I created for a test in my university. So the test was to create a game using C++ Builder, and that was all the task, so it was up to me to do anything that I wanted. So here is what I created. Here you can see a simple splash screen that tells you how to move. I didn't bother with that very much, as you can see right here. So let's go. So we are introduced to the game screen. When we press P, the game will start. So here is the game. You can see a lot of spaceships flying towards you, and you can destroy all of them hitting the space bar or the left mouse button in order to shoot. They keep coming all the time, and their spawn rate gets smaller and smaller, so they spawn faster every time, and you will be able to see that in a moment. So let's play until I die. As you can clearly see, there are three types of enemies. These small fast ones that jump towards the player, these slow ones that have a lot of health, and normal ones that move in a spiral. The player has a life bar on the top left and a score counter on the top right, so you can track your results. And unfortunately I was too lazy to create some sort of a high score system that keeps track of the player's score, but at least you will be able to see that score after your death, so you will be able to write it down somewhere. Also, since the player fires a beam, it can damage multiple enemies at once. So here I just demonstrated that. And as you can already see, enemies are coming faster and faster all the time. The beam that the player fires isn't the strongest in an instant. It has some delay. And here I died. My score is 7,600, which isn't bad. My high score is 13,000. And if you press P, the game restarts. So that's it. Now I want to show you how it was actually done. So I was again a bit lazy with my code. I used only two files that were generated by the C++ Builder environment itself, which was the main form header and the main form CPP file, which contained all the code. But again, because I was lazy, I put my code everywhere, both in the header and the CPP file, which you will be able to see here. So let's start with the header. First, I created a structure for my vector mathematics. Here you can see all the operators and functions that I used. Everything is fairly simple. Also, I use 3 coordinates. The game is 2D, so I don't really use the third coordinate, rather than to show the depth of the object, but I don't use it in any other way. So here you can see a particle structure which has its position, its direction, which is basically velocity, its health, and a function to update it. And now you can see a struct called particle system, which is basically a placeholder for all the particles. It has a position and a few variables that define how those particles are created and updated. Now you can see an entity structure. Both the player and all the enemies are entities. You can see they have a collision radius and some other variables such as position, rotation, and so on. Also, they have a spawn frame to keep track of when they spawned and what should they do. This is mainly used to update their logic. And each entity can have multiple particle systems. For example, to show that they are moving, to shoot particles out of their engine, and so on. And of course they have their health. And all the entities except the player, so all the enemies, are collected in one std vector, and when all the enemies die, they create like an explosion particle. So we have a vector of explosion particles for their death. So, and then a lot of different functions. So let's move on to our functions. First, the drawing. So we can go to render GLC, which is basically all the OpenGL handling. So I got that code from a tutorial on their website. Here you can clearly see that they have all the code that you need. Just copy paste everything into your project and you will be good to go to use OpenGL in C++ Builder. So it's their official website, so they know what they are doing. Then in this function I call render game, render debug, and render menu. So I'm going to show you render debug in a minute, and you could already see the render menu function, which displayed the splash screen with the instructions how to play and so on. So here is the render menu function. It just binds the menu texture and then resizes the polygon of the texture so it fits the screen. And after that, if the game mode is 2, which is basically after you lost the game, it renders your score with this function. So let's move to render numbers at first, so I get it out of the way. So it's very simple. It has a number array. So let's show it. So here is C++ Builder, endless battle, and here are all the textures including numbers. As you can see, it's just a texture that contains all the numbers, which is basically a tile sheet. And then we go through all the characters in the string and draw them one by one, one after another. So let's check our render game, which is where the main game is rendered. So first of all, we can see our render HUD function. Let's go to that. It's very simple. First of all, we draw the player health bar, which has a few textures. So first of all, we have this thing, which is a bit hard to see, but basically it's a capsule that contains the player health bar. so the foreground of that health bar. And after that we draw a simple polygon with player health. Very basic, very simple. And after that we render the player's score and we are good to go. So let's move on. Next thing you can see is the particle system. It calls all the draw particles. First of all the death particles, which should be drawn first, then all the enemies, and then the player and the charge. So first of all, I want to point out that I didn't use any complex shaders that I wrote myself. Everything was standard, and also I didn't use depth checking, so I had to choose what objects to draw first myself. So that's where I got the order from. First the particles, then the entities, and then the player's charge. So the charge is the player's weapon that the player fires to destroy enemies. But first of all, I want to show you the draw particles. I have 3 functions that take different parameters, but I am going to show you only one of them because the rest are the same. So we get a pointer to an entity, and we iterate for every particle system and draw every particle, and after that we update it. So I want to say that every particle is just a point with a certain size and color and so on. Here you can see a little bit of math that is used to determine which color, size and so on is used. And after that, if the game is not paused, we should update the particle and decrease its health. And of course the direction, because in the game the particles are affected by gravity, you may call it, or whatever. So after that you can see that we move on to drawing entities and drawing entity warning. So let's see that. So first of all, draw entity. Again, very simple. We translate and rotate our view, our camera basically, then draw the entity with its texture, and also the entity's color is its health. So the more likely the entity is going to die, the more red it becomes. And after that we change the view to the default using load identity. So draw entity warning was a thing that I developed at the last moment. It's the red thing that indicates where the enemy is outside the screen. So if we launch the game, you can see them on the top right, and that's how you determine where the enemy is, and you can shoot them while they're not on the screen. Again, very simple. It just has a bunch of if-elses that check for their position and draw a respective box on the corner of the screen. So after that we move on to draw charge. Let's check that. It's again a very simple thing. First of all, we draw a point, and that basically is when the player is charging their weapon, and when the player releases the fire button, we draw a triangle and a square to create the view So here you can see that, for example, we have the ship, then we draw a triangle, then we draw another triangle and another one, and basically this is the charge, and the player this is the player's texture, and they are also drawn using two triangles like this. So very simple, very basic again. And let's move to draw debug. Render debug. Here it is. First of all, we draw entity collision, and then we draw a bunch of lines that I will show you in a minute. Enemy collision is very simple to draw. It's basically, again, just a simple point that has its own size and so on, that represents the enemy's collision. So I think that's it for the rendering. We covered pretty much everything. So let's see all the collision in game. So the debug key is U and the help key is H. H is basically that splash screen with controls that displays the start of the game. And we also have the pause key, which is G. So let's check everything out. So let's press U, and here you can see all the debug. So all the lines represent the player's mouse at the middle of the screen, and the mathematics that are used to determine where the player's ship should point. The boxes in the corner of the screen, which show where the enemies are, become twice as big. And also there are lines starting in the middle of every ship that show their direction and their velocity. So as you can see, all the big ships are going in a straight line towards the player, and they are going relatively slow. All these medium standard ships are going in a spiral, and all the small ships are jumping constantly. So that's it for the debug, and if we wait a bit and then press G, you will be able to see that we have a pause system that shows all the enemies and particles and so on. So if you want to rest for a bit, you can do it. Now let's move on to collision. So the collision is very simple. I used the simple two-ball collision, where basically we have a big ball and a small ball. They have their velocities, so velocity 1, velocity 2, and mass 1, mass 2. So using very simple laws of physics, you can see that so mass 1 times the gravity is basically their gravity. However, as I don't use it, you can use only the simple laws, such as that the velocity of all the objects and their energy should remain equal both before and after the collision. So I use that principles in order to do a bit of math. So here it is, and in the game you will be able to see it. If an enemy bumps into another enemy or if I bump into an enemy. So as you can see, they start bumping and so on. And if I bump to a big enemy, they just push me. So because they are very big, they have a lot of mass. And if I bump into an ordinary enemy, they get pushed back because it's like their safe management. So if they want to stay safe and to keep attacking me, they will have to stay back in order for me not to destroy them. And of course, both me and the enemy that I bump into get damaged. So as you can see here, I'm a bit damaged, so I am going to have to restart. But if I bump into a lot of enemies, they get destroyed because they get a bit of damage also because of the collision. And that's basically it. Every enemy has their health and their damage, and if I want, I can change all the variables here. As you can see, there is a huge amount of different variables. Also, I want to talk about the update system a bit. So it's called update game. First of all, I check for all the particles. I want to create a new particle every time. However, if I already reached a maximum capacity of particles, that means that I will have to use some old particle. So I check if some particle has a health below 0, which means that they can be used. Then I reinitialize all the particles with new values. And for all the death particles, the explosion particles after the enemy's death, I check if there are still some particles alive, and if all the particles died, I just erase that particle system from existence. Then I check for input and modify the player's speed. After that, I test for mouse and rotate the player according to the mouse rotation. After that, I move the player. It's very simple. I just add their velocity to their position, and I decrease the player's speed over time. Then I check for out of bounds in case a player reaches the edge of the screen, so they can't fly away. Then I check for the frames. Again, as you can see, I use a lot of variables, and if it is the right time for the enemy to spawn, I call a function called enemy spawn, which takes a parameter called enemy type. If I did spawn an enemy, I update the enemy spawn rate in order to spawn more enemies over time. After that, I check if the ray that the player shoots hits some enemies, and if they do, then I just subtract the charge force from the enemy's health, and that's how I update all of them. Then I check for enemy collision, which I already showed, and after that I call enemy update, which basically updates their logic, such as flying towards the player. And after that, I check if the player has died. So there are a few functions that I want to take a look at. First of all, enemy destroy and enemy update, and after that, enemy spawn. So enemy destroy is very simple. I update the player's score and create a particle system which is the enemy's explosion, and that's pretty much it for the enemy destruction. Then we move to enemy spawn. It's again very simple. I just set up a lot of variables. There are health, position, speed, and so on. Again, everything is very straightforward. And after that, we move to enemy update functions. Here is the update for the fast enemy, I think. Maybe not, maybe it's the ordinary enemy. Either way, I set up the particle system, update all the particles, update the rotation, and after that move the enemy. I think that it's the standard enemy that moves in a spiral, because you can see that we update its angle. Then we move on to the fast enemy. So everything very simple again, update its position, rotation, and particles. And after that I check if it's time to jump for the enemy, and if it is, I update their speed. Everything is very simple again. And the strong, slow enemy is the simplest, because all I have to do is to manage their speed and keep the speed at a constant point, if you may say so. I don't change everything. You can't really move the enemy. It stays in its position and always moves towards the player. So I think that's pretty much it. I discussed all of the functions and showed all of the features, and there is nothing more to show. All the code will be available in the description. I don't think that it will be very easy to use this thing with anything, because I don't think I will be able to include all the textures and so on, but we will see about that. We will see what can I do. The C++ builder version is 10.2, and that's it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave a like if you like the video. I will try to improve myself and do even more cool things in the future. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notifications about my future videos, because my upload rate is a bit suffering right now. But anyways, thank you for watching.